right.
Hey, everybody, we are live, and I'm here with Pete, and we're talking all things mobile in anticipation of Mobile World Congress. And we're going
Hmm.
to do a little walk through memory lane as two older guys who have been to, many Mobile World Congresses over the years. Peter, I know you have ideas, you have insights, you have things on your mind in advance of
Oh, yeah.
MWC, as do I.
Hmm.
And we want to share those. So before we dive into all things MWC, maybe for those who don't know Pete, introduce yourself, a little bit
Sure.
about your incredible background and your current mission at Excelsior.
Yeah. So, Pete Bernard. So I spent about 14 years in Silicon Valley doing kind of firmware, phone, edge, IoT things. Went to Microsoft, spent about 18 years at Microsoft doing similar things with Windows Phone and Azure Edge and things like that. And then I started a company called Excelsior, and we focus on edge computing, all things edge computing, where that's heading, who's doing what are the strategies to scale your business in the space. And yeah, it's been a lot of fun. So it's great to talk about a show that I think anyone who's been involved in telecom, it's been part of their experience for the past, 20 years or so. And so anytime NWC comes around, it always stirs up lots of, memories and anticipations of where things are going and what's happening. So it's a good time to talk about it.
Well, let's look back, because this industry, this show in particular, has a long lineage that started off as 3GSM. I
Right.
think I was there and you were there. I have vague recollection of it, but what's your recollection?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so my first time at the show was in 2002. I was working for a company that was selling embedded Java JVMs for handsets and things like that. And, at the time, it was in Cannes in France for about, I think the show actually started in 1987 in Brussels. So 2002 was the first time I went there. It was called 3GSM. And we had actually rented a boat. So one of the cool things about having it in Cannes, which is not the case in Barcelona, was it was all down at the docks, and you had all these boats lined up. Some of them were like yachts, from these big companies. We had rented a boat. There was about 6 or 8 of us. We slept on the boat. We had demos on the boat. We had meeting rooms. Our meeting room was on the boat. And it was a great community there. Probably about 30,000 people showed up, maybe max, I think, in Cannes. And of course, that was early days of data, and obviously, 5 years before the iPhone was introduced and Android and things like that. So it was early,
Yeah,
kind of.
I may have been there a lot earlier then, because I
Hmm.
was there when it was 300 people in Cannes, and
Ooh.
the first GSM phone had just been launched. It was the Nokia, and the first roaming agreements had been agreed, and that was all the talk. And I remember Qualcomm was there for the first time, because they had just
Hmm.
introduced CDMA as a standard, and that was the
Okay.
big battle of the day. That was
Right.
CDMA versus
Versus
GSM,
GS.
and
Yes.
someone like stole the Qualcomm slides from their
Hmm.
presentation, and it
Yikes.
was very dramatic event at the time. Of course, this is all history now. I mean, fast forward to today,
Yeah.
where are we with the mobile industry? The good, the bad, the ugly, Pete.
It's interesting. I was taking a look at doing some of my own research too about where things have been heading. I think that, as you may know, the show was canceled in 2020. They delayed it in 21, and they're getting back on track. But it certainly is a different time. I mean, the industry has shifted quite a bit, and the show is has a little bit of an anachronistic feel to it. To be honest with you, at this point, there is still a big part of MWC, which is about phones and phone introductions, and we will definitely see some interesting new phones there. From the Xiaomi's, HMDs, Samsungs, Lenovo will have some devices and things. So there's that part of the show, which is still happening. But, I mean, Apple's never been there. It's not an Apple show. Samsung does their Unpacked event. So it's not really a show to break news on devices that much. And then, the other thing that's been happening in the past few years is that the whole industry has become very, I don't want to say cloudified or virtualized, and with things like Open RAN, and kind of the cloudification of all these systems. And now with AI, that's, very cloud driven at this point. the center of gravity in the industry has really shifted, I think, away from phones. And even the telco infrastructure, kind of the big story is this cloudification and kind of transformation that's going on. So I think the show is kind of is having an existential crisis, I think, just like the industry is, around like, okay, where do we go from here? Like, who are we exactly as an industry? And so I think that is going to be one of the themes. I think, to the credit of the show, folks, I think there's going to be like 90,000 people there this year in Barcelona. It's very well laid out. There's plenty of buses and cabs and things to see and things to do. And of course, the restaurants are fantastic. But the real question is like, where's this industry heading? And how are people going to monetize it, beyond the telcos and beyond the mobile operators? So that's kind of what's been on my mind. I think it's like, I think it's an opportunity and a challenge, because I think we are at sort of an existential crossroads with the telco industry as things become more cloudified, more by design. So that's kind of what's on my mind these days.
Well, yeah, it's a show that will be dominated, at least by share of voice, by the hyperscalers who've kind of upstaged the telco. The telcos, certainly one hyperscaler in particular, your old stomping grounds at Microsoft, will just be there in force. Any predictions or insights to what Microsoft will be up to at MWC?
Well, I mean, I think Microsoft, I would put AWS in this camp too, although Microsoft has a little more in the offering plate since they acquired Metaswitch and Affirmed, right? I mean, the whole idea is, how do you take your kind of bespoke proprietary telco infrastructure for packet switching and move that to a cloud, right? And so you're, making bets on hyperscalers to move some of your telco infra workloads to places like Azure and AWS and GCP and other places like that. So I think Microsoft will be pushing that story pretty hard in terms of, being able to handle that, have some case studies on that, and enable telcos to reduce their costs and be more agile and leverage all of the, infrastructure equipment that Microsoft and the hyperscalers are putting in place. That all being said, that's a kind of a big bet for a lot of telcos to make that leap, right? And I think what we've seen is, the folks like Nokia and Ericsson that have been kind of the stalwarts of the telco infrastructure, embracing things like Open RAN and providing the kind of solutions and infrastructure to telcos, and also still being, Nokia and Ericsson as suppliers. So it'll be interesting to see sort of how that plays out, like who leaps into the full cloudified telco infra versus, sort of stays the course with their own equipment and their own cloud, but leverages Nokia and Ericsson. So I think that's kind of where, if it used to be GSM and CDMA, now it's going to be sort of Nokia, Ericsson, Open RAN versus hyperscalers, see who's going to get the win for that stuff. So
it looks like the hyperscalers are really teaming up with the telcos. I know Microsoft had a huge deal with Vodafone, of course, a dominant player. So it really is co-opetition in some way, partnering more than stepping on each other's toes. Or you think that's going to change?
I think so. Well, it's interesting to think about, like, telcos are very big enterprises, right, that have to run their operations, and many of them do rely on companies like Microsoft to run their operations, right? So Microsoft does have an advantage in that they can go to a Vodafone and partner at like 5 or 6 different levels, and helping them with their AI, and their customer service and their OSS, BSS integration. And they can help them in like 6 or 7 different ways, including, packet core switching into the cloud. So that's an advantage of a hyperscale. I think AWS could do something similar, even though they don't have their own packet core. They could go in there to a telco and help them in their digital transformation journey. Whereas someone like a Nokia or Ericsson, is really much more about, I'm going to give you this high performance solution for, your 5G standalone stuff. And us, and we've bought from us from a decade or 2. And so that's their sort of competitive advantage. So it's interesting to see, like, one of the big things that's happened over the past probably 5 years or so is this whole idea of virtualization of software and virtualization of workloads, is now saying, well, there's containers and it can run all over the place and we can orchestrate them. And we don't need, custom ASICs with, proprietary switches that sit in a rack somewhere. And that's like, I think when you think about Open RAN, that is the kind of the big, leap of faith that telcos are thinking about. Like, how much do I, invest in this kind of open architecture, quote unquote, since they've been, pretty bespoke and proprietary for decades, for good reason. And I think that's the existential twist that's happening, I think, with a lot of these folks. And we've seen announcements. I mean, AT&T announced Open RAN investments. I mean, Dish's, they're already there. Rakuten's already there. A lot of the disruptors are already there. But it's just a matter of like the folks like Vodafone who've, made the right signals, and AT&T and some of the big folks that have been around for 50 years. When do they start switching over into this new cloudified telco infrastructure? I think that's kind of an undercurrent at the show is who's leaping into the cloud and how are they doing it and who they're doing it with. But you're right, there'll be a lot of noise out there about that. And I was at MWC in Vegas in the fall. I think I saw you there. And a lot of open discussions about Open RAN and how to get there from here and how to do interop testing. And it's very hard to, as you may know, I'm sure you do, it's like you break up an ecosystem, like maybe breaking up a solution into an ecosystem is very hard to do, right? If something is closed, to then disaggregate it into pieces and have everyone make a piece that works together, that's complicated. And I think that's a lot of what the telco industry is struggling with right now.
Great insight. And if that's an undertone, an overtone might be what's next with 5G. I mean, we sort of, have this overhype, over marketing of 5G. We talked a lot about things that were maybe 5 years ahead of time, like tele-robotic surgery on bananas from across the country, and, autonomous cars and, things that just were outside of the actual deliverable of the network. And funny enough, I think we're catching up now with standalone 5G, and I guess people are calling it 5.5G. I guess that's some marketing Huawei. But what's the reality of 5G? And the operators are really desperate for ROI on all this network.
Yeah. Well, you hit the nail on the head. I think it was originally sold with the promise of a lot of this 5G standalone network slicing, remote surgery around bananas kind of thing. Probably many years ahead of when that was actually being deployed. The good news is now 5G standalone is getting deployed. There is enough, handsets out there where they don't need the LTE legacy stuff as much. And so when 5G standalone actually gets deployed and it is being rolled out around the world, that actually does deliver on a lot of the promises that were made, 3 to 5 years ago about 5G around latency and bandwidth and frankly, a much more efficient use of spectrum for all these telcos that paid a lot of money for their spectrums. They can get more bits in there at lower cost with 5G standalone. So that is probably the next big thing. And, it'll deliver on a lot of the earlier promises of 5G. So I think the sooner that gets rolled out, the better. Now, will that, unlock things like remote surgery and kind of headset-based gaming and stuff? Probably not for a while. But I think it will actually enable 5G to be a lot more commercially viable for businesses, for like fixed wireless, for private 5G, for 5G red cap, which is kind of the low power LP WAN type stuff. You'll start to see it actually replace or augment Wi-Fi and a lot of other commercial deployments as we get to more of the standalone deployment. So I think that's kind of the next phase. Like we've gotten out of everyone has a 5G phone. We did the non-standalone. It's a little faster. Now we're moving into the next phase where it actually will be faster and lower latency, and you'll have more commercial use cases that'll be usable with the network. So looking forward to that.
Well,
Hopefully
it's
we'll
just
have some.
taken longer than we hope, but c'est la vie. That's life. Everything takes longer than expected.
Always
Um,
does.
it's an interesting show in that it's kind of a big automotive show. There's a lot of automotive technology. There's embedded technology for tracking and sensors and
Yes.
analytics in car. Qualcomm has a big push there.
Mhm.
That's kind of a new twist. I mean, automobiles now are they're computers on wheels. They're also phones on wheels, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they're
Yeah. I mean, it's the
so
software
it's
defined vehicle is a hot space. We saw
mm,
it at CES as well. Although interestingly, at CES we didn't have the major car manufacturers there.
mm.
Um, but I think this is another. If the telco world is going through this existential crisis, so is the automotive world, right? They're moving from like metal bending to like software deployment and all that stuff. And so it's a whole new generation of players in that space. You mentioned Qualcomm, but also NXP and Infineon and other folks that are in there. So it's a really good use case for connectivity, clearly. And I think it's an opportunity for telcos to be a pipe to those cars.
Mm.
I'm skeptical of telcos uh, doing more than just providing a pipe to cars, to be honest with you.
Mm.
um, so I think telcos sort of need to figure out, and this is where I talk about like saving telcos from themselves is kind of my theme, is that telcos need to figure out what lane they're in, no pun intended. They are either an incredibly smart pipe, right? That's like high performance, low latency, great, capabilities with the spectrum that they have, and great tariffs and all kinds of great stuff. Or they're a solution provider, right? And they're actually going out there and deploying solutions for commercial businesses and ports and airports and water systems and car manufacturers and stuff. You sort of have to pick a lane and be really good at it. And I think telcos have struggled with which one are they in. They're sort of like, well, we do this. We want to be a solution provider, but really our key metric is subscriber ads. It's like, well, that you got to sort of have different metrics for success if you're a solution provider than if you were a pipe. So it'll be interesting to see how the telcos position themselves at MWC, which lane they're in and who's doing what. Like, for example, one of the great success stories on solution providers is Telstra. So
Mm.
Telstra, which actually has been around for about 100 years or so. They started as like a post
No
office.
kidding. Well, some of their
Yeah,
POTS lines are probably 100 years old. Yes.
that's true, probably. Um, but they are really an incredible solution provider these days. They
Mm.
provide all kinds of like water treatment and rail systems and all kinds of stuff across Australia. And I'd heard a stat somewhere where only about 50% of their solutions are even cellular based. Like they'll solve
Mm.
stuff with Wi-Fi if that makes sense for them. And so they've
Yeah,
really built
really.
out some great stuff. So they really embrace the solution mindset. And they've made it work. And there's a few folks like telcos that have done that, and other telcos that say, hey, look, we're just a really super smart pipe. We're really
Mm.
cost efficient. We're low latency. So that's kind of one of those things too, where now that things are getting more cloudified, telcos have to figure out like what's their reason for being. Which one are they? So we'll see.
Yeah, and I think one of the big reasons for being that, of course, is applications. And finally, we're seeing telcos opening up the network to developers. The CPaaS, communications as a platform as a service, is beginning to take hold. We're seeing
Mm-hmm.
actually telcos start to embrace developers and building innovative products, services on their networks. So that's kind of refreshing to see as well.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see. I mean, there's the Vonage stuff from Ericsson, and
Mm-hmm.
like you mentioned, the
Infobip is
CPaaS
a big player there with its
Mm-hmm.
various telco partners enabling, CX and AI and
Yeah,
messaging kind of solutions.
it'll
That's
be interesting to see what
really
are the
cool.
applications that take advantage of those functions. And so, from a developer perspective, in as much as those can be kind of, part of the bigger developer story, I think one of the things that's challenging is if you sort of create a developer ecosystem where developers have to do something special for your network, versus someone else's network, then it's kind of hard, right? I mean, there's Microsoft does a good job at developing developers, AWS, sort of like how do you expose your network through these kind of standard developer ecosystems, so that people don't have to think about, oh, this is running on Verizon versus Vodafone versus whatever. So that's interesting to see. I'm not sure how monetizable that is, to be honest with you. Is that really going to drive subscriber ads? But I mean, it's not bad. It's a good thing.
Hey, it's a step in the right direction. The other thing that I'm intrigued by, you probably are as well, is this new satellite component to the whole mobile industry. Who would have thought 5 years ago, even 10 years ago, that you could talk to a satellite from your mobile device directly off the shelf? I mean, this is science fiction territory, but given signal processing and radio and all this stuff, and software radio, we're seeing it happen. And I think it's going to have a revolutionary impact on this industry. Of course, Starlink is already,
Kuiper. I know Kuiper will be there.
A disruptor. I guess that's something you're going to be watching too.
Yeah. So I mentioned the Kuiper folks from AWS will be at the show, and then Magnata, I think, will be there too. I think this whole satellite story is very exciting. I think it's actually probably more interesting for IoT and edge than it is for consumer handsets. I mean, I think, you're going to have to be pretty far out in the boonies to require satellite connection for your iPhone, which could happen. And so, if you're hiking or camping and stuff like that, that's good. I'm more interested in like for oil and gas companies or any of these companies that have, far-flung assets to do anomaly detection and all kinds of other things, getting those things connected through some sort of satellite cellular connection would be really amazing. So that's always been the challenge, is how do you get those things connected? Mining companies, far-flung industrial things, transportation things, leveraging satellite connectivity for that.
And even maritime shipping, boating, big market that's kind of unfulfilled, or the solutions aren't very satisfactory. Aerospace, we all have bad Wi-Fi on planes, which we complain about. It's still amazing to have internet at 30,000 feet, but we still complain now about the speeds and the latency. So lots of interesting use cases. Geopolitics is something we can't escape. Either, I'm guessing the Russian contingent will be non-existent this year. You see lots of Russian telcos and Russian people coming to MWC. I'm guessing they're not going to be there. China is always there, the big Chinese delegations and vendors. Do you have any, thoughts on the geopolitics? Are we going to continue this divide with China?
These days, technology is a geopolitical enterprise. I mean, you can't be a tech company without a geopolitical strategy of who you're buying from and who you're selling to. And so I think it'll be on everyone's mind about how they grow their business and in that environment, and also how do they build the right set of dependencies in the supply chain and in their customer chain to grow the business. So, I think it's going to be interesting. Open RAN, there was an article in the Washington Post today about Open RAN, and it was positioned as a hedge against, Huawei. So the Biden administration is pushing Open RAN, so that, once you disaggregate this ecosystem, then it's easier to not have to use Huawei in your telco infrastructure, which, I could kind of see that. So it's interesting to see how some of these, technology investments are being used to help sort of balance the geopolitical scales, as it were. But it's definitely going to be interesting. I think, on the semiconductor side, there's a lot of news about that, and what China's doing with their semiconductor investments, and kind of using last year's ASML machines to sort of do 5 nanometer chips, which will get them pretty far. But then what happens? I don't know if we'll hear too much about that at the show. But I know that, for example, like a lot of the Chinese operators have been pretty far ahead in doing things like network slicing and other, things that they've been able to do with 5G before a lot of the Western telcos have been able to do it. And their infrastructure for LPWAN and IoT and edge is incredibly robust. It's unfortunate, I think, that there isn't more ability to kind of share and learn these days between some of these entities. Hopefully that'll thaw at some point. But the other fact is, unfortunately, the fact is that you mentioned like Starlink and some of these connectivity capabilities, are being used, like in the war in Ukraine and other places, and use of drones and a lot of like intelligent connected things used by military, and that's a fact. And that is, in one hand, driving investment and innovation, and at the other hand, creating some real kind of disruption and real scary, scary scenarios. And so I think anyone who's in the tech business, like I said, has to have a geopolitical strategy and think about, what they're doing and who they're doing it with and all that other stuff. So
yeah, the supply chain now as well has become, top of mind to everyone. What do you think is next for Mobile World Congress and the GSMA? Do you think it's just another 25 years ahead, or does this industry need more disruption or reinvention when it comes to events, shows?
Well, it'll be interesting to see if they pivot a little more, because I think connectivity is becoming a much more of a pastiche of technologies, right? So like things, can MWC kind of evolve into more of a connectivity community as opposed to just cellular? It's been very telco cellular, licensed spectrum oriented. And I would love to see it talk about more unlicensed spectrum and other things that are happening out there. We talked about satellite. There's things like LoRaWAN and other types of, unlicensed spectrum communication technologies that are also part of the equation. So, I don't think it can become a cloud show. That doesn't really make any sense. It's still got to be a connectivity show. Personally, I think the whole idea of introducing phones and devices there is kind of passé. But I think there's something around the connectivity community that it needs a good once a year or twice a year event sort of come together and figure stuff out. I feel like MWC kind of owns that space. I think they just have to be careful about not turning into the, we're the cloud AI folks, or we're the whatever. It's like, no, you're the connectivity folks. It's fine to be just that. So we'll see. It's 90,000 people this year.
Unbelievable.
Will they get more next year? I don't know. I feel like once shows get to about 100,000 people, they start to sort of collapse upon themselves,
Yeah, there's
like
a certain
CES,
gravity at work there.
CES has turned into sort of everything that runs on electricity show, which is I like it when they're a little more valuable when they're a little more focused, I think. So hopefully MWC can stay there. There is one piece of news that I'm interested in getting my hands on. I mean, I was just kind of introducing devices, but apparently Lenovo is going to introduce like a transparent laptop at MWC. And so this
sounds
is
like a CES announcement, not an MWC.
I know, doesn't it? It's like a dual screen laptop, which is cool. But then the flip up screen, is transparent. And so, I guess you can see through it when it's not turned on. So anyway, that to me feels like the coolest device being introduced. But I know it probably has nothing to do with, again, connectivity or MWC, but apparently that's the rumor, is that they have a press announcement and they're going to introduce this transparent laptops.
I'm going to check that out, and I will be the judge if it's truly transparent. I just want Apple to put an eSIM in its MacBook here. I mean, there are so many little things in our space that can be done. Maybe not transparent laptops, but just 5G laptops. That would be nice, or other kinds of devices.
Well, it's interesting. There's a real push there with like Windows on Snapdragon and some of the things that Microsoft is doing to leverage. It's great to have Qualcomm powered laptops, but obviously something that's integrated 5G, the always connected PC is always it was a great promise, right? Because you don't have to ask the barista for a password to get connected on your laptop. Like, imagine if you had to do that with your phone. That would be insane. So why not do it in the laptop? And I think, you're pointing out an interesting problem to be solved. The issue is primarily just economics. That, adding 5G radios and all the front end preamps and all the goo on there increases the BOM, so now you're adding a couple $100 to the price of the laptop. And we all know when you go into Costco, If something costs 1,200 and something costs 1,000, you're like, I'll go for the 1,000. So
Apple's charging $3,500 for a headset, so I think they can afford to add a little.
You'd think they could
special sauce to
push it in there. But then the other issue is once you get the radio in there and the eSIM, then it's like, well, who are you paying per month and how much to have that laptop connected? You've never really had telcos embrace that opportunity. So do you want to pay an extra 20 or 30 bucks a month for your laptop? And then that kind of falls flat too. So there's these
are the kind of questions. These are the kind of questions you help clients answer, right? Before we wrap up here, maybe a little plug for your services, your consulting work.
Yes. So actually, if you want to learn more about what we were just all talking about on my YouTube channel, I have a video series called Saving Telco from Itself. And so I walk through a lot of these different things that, telcos and people supplying the telco ecosystem can get involved with. And yeah, I do help companies figure out kind of this strategy on how to scale their business, how to kind of crack some of these nuts that are really hard to figure out so they can get to the next level. But we started talking about what was happening 20 years ago. I think we're still struggling with some of the same issues about how do you get the tech to a price point and a delivery mechanism where it really solves problems. And I think that's what we're going to see at MWC this year. The same thing. The chips are faster, the networks are better. Everyone's a little older, but it's still the same challenges. And so hopefully we'll start to solve some of those.
Well, always look forward to your insights and analysis. And thanks everyone for watching. Reach out if you're at MWC or even online. MWC24 is the hashtag. Always happy to chat and banter and connect. Thanks everyone for watching.
Sounds good. Thanks, Evan.
Take care, Peter. Talk to you soon.
All right.